Okay, let's dive right into this explainer and absolutely dismantle the famous Greek myth of a flesh-eating Minotaur trapped in an inescapable gloomy maze. I mean, we've all heard the bedtime story, right? The hero Theseus venturing into the dark depths to slay a monster. But the actual history behind that legend, it's so much richer. Today we're going to look at the spectacular reality of Bronze Age Crete and see how a vibrant, highly advanced civilization got completely twisted into a dark horror story.
It's kind of fascinating how perfectly this captures the pivot from myth to history. On one hand, you have the legend, a terrifying maze, blood sacrifices, and a literal monster, which, let's be honest, was essentially invented by later Greek storytellers just to make their hometown hero look good. But then you look at the reality. We're talking about a sophisticated society defined by jaw-dropping athletic bull-reaping rituals, a massive economic network that demanded tributes, and the stunning Palace of Knossos. This was literally Europe's first advanced, literate society.
Let's trace the incredible timeline of this Mediterranean superpower. Way back around 3000 BCE in the pre-palatial period, they were already laying down their seafaring and metallurgy roots. By 1900 BCE, they're building centralized cities and actually developing writing. Then, boom, we hit their golden age around 1700 BCE. This was a period of breathtaking architectural marvels and total sea dominance. And get this, it was long before classical Athens even existed. Finally, by 1450 BCE, we see a decline. But to really understand the myth, we have to look closely at their absolute peak.
So, the crucial point about the dreaded labyrinth from the myth really comes down to this massive number, 1,000. The terrifying maze, it wasn't an underground prison at all. Actually, scratch that, it wasn't a prison in any sense. It was simply the Palace of Knossos, a massive, centralized administrative hub containing over 1,000 interconnected rooms. We're talking a multi-level complex serving as the absolute political, religious, and economic center for the entire island. Now put yourself in the shoes of an outsider from mainland Greece. Walking into this multi-story, bustling metropolis with its winding, seemingly endless corridors would have been completely disorienting. Remember, these visitors were coming from places where homes were basically simple and square. Suddenly, they're trying to navigate a labyrinthine complex of staircases, courtyards, and storage rooms. It literally felt exactly like a maze. And that overwhelming confusion, that layout stuck in their cultural memory for centuries.
And this right here brilliantly illustrates exactly how a myth is born. The word labyrinthos comes from the suffix enthos, which just means place of, and labris, which was a sacred double-headed axe. Images of these double axes were carved all over the stone walls of the Knossos palace. So the literal translation of the word likely just meant place of the double axe, referring to the palace itself. It was never a terrifying puzzle meant to trap people.
Let's move on to the monster itself, shall we? The Minoans definitely didn't harbor a bloodthirsty beast, but man, they did possess a deep, almost total cultural obsession with bulls. To the people of Crete, the bull was a central, sacred symbol of divinity, of power, of ritual. Bull imagery was quite literally everywhere, in their art, their religion, and just their daily lives.
Imagine being an awestruck foreigner watching their golden age ritual of bull leaping. You can totally see how the boundary between human and bull could blur into legend. Young Minoan athletes would literally perform acrobatic flips right over the backs of massive, charging bulls. If you're an outsider watching a leaper seamlessly move together with this incredibly powerful beast, well, you can see exactly how the legend of a terrifying half-man, half-bull entity got its start.
As for the gruesome story of King Minos feeding 14 Athenian youths to the monster every 9 years, well, this actually just reflects mainland Greece paying economic tributes to a dominant sea empire. During their peak, the Minoans held a thalassocracy, which is just a fancy word for a maritime hegemony over the Aegean Sea. Athens, being subject to this massive economic dominance, likely had to send wealth or even political hostages to Crete. So the myth of Theseus? It's really just a heroic, metaphorical retelling of Athens finally breaking free from Minoan trade control.
Section 1. Inside the real labyrinth. The Palace of Knossos. Now that we've debunked the myth, let's take a virtual tour inside this thousands-room architectural marvel and see what life was really like.
The moment you step inside, that myth of a gloomy, terrifying prison just vanishes. Instead of dark, bloody stone, the interior walls were illuminated by these brilliant light wells that let natural light just pour right in. The walls were covered in brightly colored, incredibly joyful frescoes depicting nature, lively ceremonies, dolphins leaping through the water, and of course, those sacred bulls. It was a place absolutely teeming with life and color.
The sheer engineering genius of this civilization is honestly staggering, especially when you consider this number 4,000. 4,000 years ago, they were mastering luxury infrastructure that was quite literally millennia ahead of the Romans. This wasn't just a big building, you guys. It was an absolute engineering triumph. Their advanced plumbing systems were simply incredible. They used tapered terracotta pipes to carefully manage water flow. They built complex drainage networks right beneath the floors. And get this, they even brought sophisticated sanitation and actual flushing toilets into the palace. Think about that. We wouldn't see this level of civic engineering in Europe again for thousands of years.
We also know for a fact this wasn't just a royal residence, because archaeologists found vast storage magazines filled with giant ceramic jars called pithoi. These things were massive. They held thousands of gallons of olive oil, wine, and grain collected from all across Minoan Crete. It's solid proof that Knossos functioned as a massive redistribution center, a true economic heart pumping resources throughout their entire maritime empire.
Deep within this sprawling complex lies a relatively unassuming stone seat that commands immense historical respect. It actually holds the title of the oldest surviving throne in all of Europe. Now, for a long time, purely because of the myths, people just kind of assumed this must have belonged to the legendary cruel King Minos himself. But while the myth assigned it to a king, many modern scholars believe this actually seated a powerful Minoan priestess. And, this perfectly aligns with their unique religion. They didn't center around a pantheon of male warlords like later Greek mythology did. Their worship was heavily focused on powerful female deities and snake goddesses. So the true ruler sitting on Europe's oldest throne, it may very well have been a woman. Section 2. Collapse and Modern Discovery. Sadly, no empire lasts forever, right? So let's look at exactly how this vibrant civilization faded into myth and how we finally managed to dig it back up. The beginning of the end was triggered by nature. The Thera cataclysm was one of the largest volcanic events in human history, popping off on the nearby island of Thera, which is what we call Santorini today. That massive eruption unleashed devastating tsunamis, heavy ashfall, and a massive economic disruption that severely crippled both the Minoan agricultural base and their all-important naval fleet. Sensing weakness after the eruption, the warlike Mycenaeans invaded around 1450 BCE, and you can actually track this hostile takeover right through their writing. We see a tragic shift from the Minoan linear A script, which was used during their peak and remarkably remains completely undeciphered to this day, straight to linear B, which was adapted by the Mycenaean conquerors and stands as the earliest known form of written Greek. The Minoan voice was quite literally overwritten.
So how exactly did we rediscover this lost world? By 1100 BCE, the grand palaces were completely abandoned. Over the centuries, the sprawling, advanced metropolis faded into nothing more than a bedtime story about a maze and a monster. It really took a major 20th century excavation to finally bring the truth back to light.
That brings us to the British archaeologist Sir Arthur Evans. He started excavating the Knossos site in the early 1900s, and he was so struck by the complex maze-like ruins and the incredibly vivid bull frescoes everywhere that he actually named the entire civilization Minoan, drawing directly from the myth of King Minos. So ironically, the very name we use for them today is inextricably tied to the legend. However, Evans didn't just dig the palace up, he actively rebuilt it, sparking what's known as the concrete controversy. Evans controversially used modern concrete to rebuild walls, columns, and frescoes based on his own interpretations of what the palace might have looked like. While it undeniably created the spectacular, vibrant site that visitors walk through today, it remains a heavily debated topic among modern archaeologists, who, generally prefer preservation over imaginative reconstruction. But despite the intense debates over his use of concrete, the undeniable historical and cultural importance of Knossos remains absolute. In 2025, its legacy was globally cemented when it was officially inscribed as UNESCO World Heritage Site. It proudly stands recognized as an absolute cornerstone of human history. I'll leave you with this provocative thought. How much of our ancient history is just the spectacular reality of a lost culture, overwritten by the myths of its conquerors? Because uncovering the vibrant, sophisticated truth of the Minoans shows us that reality is often much more fascinating and far more advanced than the monster hiding in the dark. Keep questioning the myths and keep exploring the history.